Welcome to the Safe Harbor Shining the Light podcast, where we will shine the light on community issues such as substance use disorder, poverty, homelessness, and the stigma that prevents many from getting the help that they need. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Safe Harbor Shining the Light podcast. This podcast aims to shed light and shine light on social issues that often plague our communities. Many of you that have tuned in to prior episodes have heard us talking about stigma that relates to substance use, mental health, poverty, and homelessness. And so I'm excited to expand on those topics today, as the month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I'm so excited to have two wonderful guests with us today. Chris Johnson is the former principal and founder of the leadership development group Young People of Integrity. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And then Casey McCall is with us. He is the community navigator for Hickory Police Department. And so both of you gentlemen, you are heroes of mine and very good colleagues and friends, and I appreciate the work that both of you have done in our community in reference to advocacy and providing services and supports for so many people that struggle with substance use, mental health, and homelessness. And so I would love for both of you to just share a little bit about how you came to work in the field of substance use, mental health, homelessness, and also why you're passionate about being an advocate for these issues. So, Chris, I'm going to let you start us off, sir.
Okay. All right. So, in April 2003, I came to Hickory as a homeless person, and I was homeless due to a drug addiction, and I was on the streets for about 3 years. And I came to Hickory to attend Exodus homes. And while attending there, I got some support and the things that I needed to help me get, back on track. And while I was there, I noticed the kids walking up and down the street, and it kind of inspired me to start a youth program called Young Men of Integrity at the time. And so that's how I kind of got started here. And then one thing led to another. I started working for Cognitive Connection, and the rest is history.
All right. So talk to us a little about, you've had like a variety of roles within. So what did you start out doing? I know as a graduate of the wonderful program Exodus Homes here in Hickory, that you were hired by the Cognitive Connection, which is a local outpatient substance use treatment provider. They do excellent work. And so what did you start doing for the Cognitive Connection?
Well, I was like an outreach program coordinator, and I was stationed at the Salvation Army. So I had a lot of contact with the homeless population at the time. So I got to see them, come in with, no resources at all. And it was my job to try to get them some resources and a foundation built for them so that they could sustain themselves and be successful in everyday life. And a lot of those things were basically, getting an ID, a birth certificate, finding a job, finding a residency, and also providing mental health behavioral services for these folk so they could sustain a successful way of life. Yeah.
And that's where you and I met, actually.
Right.
It was about 17 years ago. I can't believe that.
It's been a long time.
But Chris, I was employed also by the Cognitive Connection. That's where I got started. And I met Chris, and his office was housed at the time at the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. And so I recall Chris. What's great about you, Chris, I think, is that you're just a wonderful facilitator, and you just develop rapport. You have an ability because of the empathy, and you've really been in you can identify with so much of the struggle of a lot of individuals that are at the Salvation Army, that you were just the perfect fit to be able to facilitate those groups with them. And so that's where I met you. And just realized that, wow, well, you're a big powerhouse. I'm going to hang out with this guy. And so we ended up being partners in crime a lot of different ways, just working with people in the community and, like you said, connecting them to services. And it certainly opened my eyes to just the barriers that exist, and we'll talk about that a little later. But so turning to Casey, I met Casey for the first time at the Salvation Army. So I'll let you talk a little bit about your professional history and how you came to be in this field.
Sure. So I guess my story starts in about 2008. Unfortunately, I was the victim of the recession of 2008, and I was in a somewhat successful sales job, for a Fortune 500 company that was indirectly related to the housing market. So in 2008, I was laid off. In a matter of months, lost everything. I can still remember not having any power in my condominium and sitting in blankets just waiting for the foreclosure to be over with. Through the grace of God and loving parents, was able to avoid the streets, but spent a better part of 2 years in and out of jobs as companies went under and things like that. And then bumped into someone that worked for the Salvation Army that said that he's got a job that he's having trouble filling. It's a job that you may not want, but come by and see me on Monday, and And I'll be honest with you, I looked at this position as a fill-in until something better in my background comes available. And then you look up and it's been 10 years and you're still working at the Salvation Army. I was hired as the shelter director for the Salvation Army. Salvation Army has an 80-bed shelter here in Hickory, and ran that program for almost 10 years. And then I was approached by the chief at the time for the Hickory Police Department, Chief Thurman Wisnett, and Major Reed Baer, in a conversation where we discussed things like their involvement with homelessness. It had become a significant percentage of their calls for service, and looking for resources, things, and then the position that I have now came from those conversations.
Wow. Well, those are both so interesting journeys, and I just know personally, because my paths have crossed both of you many times on your journey, your professional journey, just the changes, the positive changes and the impact that both of you have made in the community. It's just been fun to see both of y'all evolve into these different positions and see you thrive in them. So, but in your opinion, just based on your personal experiences in working with individuals experiencing homelessness, what are some common misconceptions with those experiencing homelessness and those that are maybe have some overlap with untreated mental health?
Well, I can honestly say that a lot of people think that homeless people are violent, that they're criminals. And it's almost really exactly the opposite. They're usually the ones who are the recipient of violent behavior and being mistreated and things like that. Most of the homeless people that I was associated with were intelligent. They were nurses. They were, people who had very decent jobs. And due to certain catastrophic life experiences, it wound them up on the street. So, and the thing was, I realized was mental health was a barrier that kind of kept them, in that position, and a lot of them couldn't pull themselves out of the rut unless they had the substantial amount of quality help.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I would agree with Chris. It's what I will say is we have a tendency to pull all of our homeless individuals together in one demographic, and that's frankly not fair. They're individuals just like you and I are with varying issues, struggling with many different things. You cannot approach the same homeless person with what their traumas are versus another homeless person. It's always going to be different. It's more in the gray area than it is black and white when you're working with those in the homeless community. And again, the mental health aspect is what I call a barrier. I even often refer to it as self-neglect. When you're trying to provide treatment for someone and they, because of their mental health, choose or opt out of those treatments, it becomes frustrating, because we can see how, I won't say easy, but how doable that treatment is, but they can't get over some of their mental barriers and things to take that first step.
Sometimes people, I think, we don't have the words to articulate what's going on inside because we're out of control.
Sure.
Right? And so it takes time. And so that's what I really appreciate about, both of the positions that you guys have had. You're able to build rapport with people and really kind of hold their hand throughout the process. And you've been able to see some successes, but in order to experience the successes with people, you've got to be willing to go on the ride with them, right? The up, down, and all around. And so, Casey, are there any stories that kind of pop in your head?
Oh, gosh, quite a few. I keep going back to when we're talking about barriers and things. As you said, building that rapport in the position I have now with officers that are dealing with what we call frequent flyers that they just, as police officers, can't get through to. But for whatever reason, being able to build that rapport with that individual and I make progress. The struggles are, for me, is we have amazing programs in this community. But their capacity doesn't meet the need.
Right.
So you will start this relationship and may have to wait a month, 90 days for that doctor visit or that mental health assessment. And as with them being in a transient lifestyle, you're trying to keep up with them, trying to make contact with them. Their phones aren't charged. They've lost their phone. It's been stolen by someone. So that becomes a bit of a struggle. But we often run into that, and it's as we like to say, we're building this ship on the water with my position. This is something we're creating as we go. But I meet them just about anywhere. I will be in our booking and be talking to them like you and I are talking, but through bars. Right. An officer once told me it was kind of funny because it looked like a scene from Silence of the Lambs or something, because I'm sitting in a chair talking through bars to someone as we kind of, as I like to say, peel back the layers of the onion. Sure. Because that's what we often get first is nobody leads with, it's always got a positive spin and it's, I just can't find work. Well, no, that's not exactly it. Let's talk about, what's your real struggle?
I have really experienced our community evolve into formulating programs, special positions like yours, Casey.
Absolutely.
And you've had every title. We don't have enough time to talk about all the titles that you've had, but being a part of a community like ours, I think it's very special. And we're very blessed to have providers like the Cognitive Connection, Law Enforcement, Safe Harbor, Catawba Valley Healthcare, really find creative and innovative ways that we can have the time devoted to working with people. In your opinion, what are some of the more systematic barriers that exist? I know, Casey, you've touched on, it's not that we don't have the services, we have the services, but the demand is so high that oftentimes the amount of time that it takes to get in front of that physician or get in front of that service provider can be a little lengthy.
Sure, yeah.
What are some other barriers that y'all have experienced that people face?
A couple of things. One is even though a homeless person may get disability, the price of housing it's so high, that they really can't afford to stay, in a place and afford their medications and all these other type things. So they would just prefer to be out free in the environment, to live, so that they're not faced with all these stresses and strains of having to pay these high quality bills and things like that. And then another is the substance abuse. Getting over the substance abuse issue is a big thing, because one, in order to get into the Salvation Army, you got a breathalyzer at night, and a lot of the folk can't blow into that breathalyzer. And the thing that would bother me, but when wintertime come and the degree drops almost down to zero, these people out in the environment, but they're there, due to other issues, but substance abuse and the quality of how high the prices are just for basic living is one of the barriers that I see that exist.
Yeah, I think people, we use the word self-medicate.
Absolutely.
If that relief and that stabilization isn't a quick turnaround in reference to medication, people often resort to self-medicating with substances, and that's very common.
Oh, absolutely. And to dovetail off of what Chris was talking about with the shelter, one thing I have to commend our community on is their ability to evolve and adapt.
Right.
I know when I was at the Salvation Army, we saw the same thing. So we implemented what they now call white flag nights, that in the winter, when it did get to those extreme temperatures, anyone was welcome through that door. You may not be the most comfortable. You may be on the floor or something, but at least you're not out and exposed to the elements.
Right.
So that's a great benefit. Absolutely right. Our housing availability is not where it needs to be. I like to say that our community has seen some growing pains as we, evolved. And frankly, you just can't build housing fast enough.
You can't.
The other issue that we run into a lot is when we do find housing for our homeless in our community, they don't have the basic living skills to maintain it. Unfortunately, working for a law enforcement agency, you sometimes have to be called to remove someone from their apartment. And you kind of see, unfortunately, you see why they're being removed.
Right.
They've destroyed property. They've, for whatever reason, become a hoarder. And so part of you has to kind of play devil's advocate and look at it from the side of the landlord or the property manager. It gets complicated.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up a good point, Casey, just like, we've hit on in former episodes that we've had, or prior episodes that we've had about, like, with substance use, like ceasing the use of substances, that is just a part of it. Housing someone that has experienced chronic homelessness, that's great in theory, but if nothing about the chaos of their life or that dysfunction that they've lived with, because they haven't pulled back the layers and addressed any of that stuff, they'll lose that housing as quickly as they get it. And that's where I think sometimes the revolving door can come in the courtroom, in the jails, in shelters, at Safe Harbor. We see that. And so the need for structured programming, life skills, long-term programming, transitional programming.
Sure.
I really feel like where those things come into play could really, because you're meeting a need, but addressing the human is is what is needed. And so I do appreciate programs and our community for, like you said, being willing to adapt and evolve with those needs. But you can't get programs up fast enough. You can't get facilities up fast enough. And so I feel like, you got to work fast and you got to do what you can with those resources. Speaking of resources and programs, what have y'all found? Like any, what's some effective programming and best practices that you have come across? Like, what works?
Wow. Well, for me, Exit Stones was just, a phenomenal resource for me.
Yeah.
Coming in, all I had was the clothes on my back. And, while I was there, other agencies that partnered with them, also provided resources as well. And then Safe Harbor, was a resource for the ladies when they came into the shelter when I was working in outreach. When you begin to help someone feel good on the outside, it helps them on the inside, And so in Exit Homes the same way. You got to, rebuild a person, especially from the inside out when you begin to work on that. So places like those right there that can actually identify and have some empathy for that individual can provide services for them that can help them.
Absolutely. I agree. What I see is the more agencies that are affecting that person, the more success you see in that person. They're all doing an amazing job. I can't just sit down and put my finger on one and say, they knocked it out. They all are. They are all partnering together. They're all collaborating. Some of our best success stories are not my success stories. They're our community's success stories, because it's not only me, it's somebody with mental health and or substance use. It's somebody that's looking for housing for them. It's peer support, it's ACT team. It's, I may have clients that have 5 different caseworkers, DSS, social services, and those are the ones that I see the most success out of. The more relationship partnerships I see in working with that individual is where, and it gives them a whole bunch of accountability partners.
Right.
So not one caseworker is carrying the full load, if you will. So
absolutely. Thank you for elaborating on that, because really community is the solution. Just building that support around that individual, and when one person, when they are connected with an ACT team, which is specific to Catawba Valley healthcare, specific to mental health, that opens doors for mental health specific housing. Not many people know that we have that resource. Not many people may know that we have a continuum of care and an interagency council.
Sure.
A Catawba Alliance for Recovery. There are coalitions and there are groups in place where we are able to be allies for one another and work together to move folks along more successfully.
And you have people coming to the table that don't normally or typically they're not typically involved with homelessness that are now coming to the table. I'm a good example of that. We have our Hickory Police Department has someone that works with the homeless. 10 years ago, that was not even a thought. I mean, they're here to protect and serve. That's their line of work. You've got people embedded in libraries that are doing some form of outreach. Hospitals. We have collaborations with first responders that see a need for. Because their involvement. It also gives you another aspect of, for example, with law enforcement, a lot of nonprofits are closed at night, and if it's a homeless issue, it falls in the lap of a law enforcement officer that needs to know what his resources are that he can help this person with. That a lot of us in the community that didn't know or wouldn't know that that's a thing. Right.
Well, how would you encourage community members to really foster a more empathetic, we've used the word empathy a few times as we're talking, just develop a more empathetic understanding of the complexities of this issues like mental health and homelessness?
Well, I think if they were more open to being involved with homeless people.
Serving.
Like when I worked for the Council on Adolescents, we did an event what we called One Homeless Night, where the kids all stayed out in front of Newton Conover Courthouse in cardboard boxes.
Oh, wow.
And people came by and they were watching us, and and then we had, like in the middle of the night, we had some homeless people come in and pulled all the young folk together and talked to them about what it was like to be homeless. And then took us on a tour into they call it the cardboard city, into where homeless people live.
Right.
So you got to know that these are individuals just like anybody else.
Right.
And they want to really get help, but they got to know that you're genuine first. They can pick up on it real quick if you have an ulterior motive in trying to help them. So they're smart, they're sharp, and I'm telling you, living on the street, you got to be on top of your game.
You do. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that, because they got to be conscious of everything around them constantly, all the time, for their safety. So they have so much to offer our community if we just open our hearts and allow them an opportunity to be a part of something, And spirituality is important as well to them, because they don't have the materialistic things that blind them like average folk do. They have nothing. And so this relationship with God, that's all they got. And people don't understand that. So if you allow them, especially in a church, churches have opportunity to reel homeless people in quicker than anybody else, and then provide services for them once you get them and you build a friendship with them. So those are the things that I see.
And there's so many ways. One, of course, like Chris is saying, education, learning what it's like. What would they call that? Like a homeless scenario, putting someone through the paces of what it's like to be homeless. And I've been through quite a few of those in my career. And it's, you wake up here, and then you've got an appointment here at 10 o'clock, and then you've got an appointment 5 miles away at 2 o'clock. And do you have enough time to get there by foot? And how do you get a bus pass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's really eye-opening to a lot of folks if they take the time. I will also say you can help in so many different ways. We're all different. Some of us are extroverted like the three of us, and but there are some that just are not. Maybe there's another way that you can assist, whether it be direct or indirect. As someone that's worked in nonprofit, as you all both have, we get lots of funding from government, but it's program specific, and you're trying to figure out how to pay the people that have to do that program. Right. And not everybody can run a thrift store. Right. So, there are so many ways, but experiencing it. We often talk about, be careful when you volunteer, because you're going to get addicted. And you're. I see it all across where you see the same volunteers, and they've been volunteering for sometimes 30 years because they just experienced it once. It soaked into them, into their soul, and they can't leave. Right. It's educating yourself and opening your door, opening your church to someone like us to come and speak and say, hey, this is what's going on.
Yes. I thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I think there is a number of opportunities that government and the faith community can collaborate together in a beautiful way, really. If we would just, take the time to invite service providers into the church, invite them into your civic groups, be aware of the needs of your community. I think of the United Way. Not many people know about 211.
Right. Yeah.
And 211 is a great resource for just needs that come along with these social issues that we are addressing. They can also connect people with a number of organizations that need volunteers, service opportunities, serving meals, working one-on-one with individuals. And so much opportunity for people to really get involved. And yes, you will fall in love with the individuals, precious, just most exceptional human beings, truly. And it's you will be blessed. It doesn't mean you're not going to be frustrated and that it's messy and it's hard, but it's so worth it, to do it. And so, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Any final thoughts as we close this out?
Just one. It takes a village to help these folk to get back on their feet, and just be empathetic to them when you see them. Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Chris hit the nail on the head. I have to stop going second. He always takes the good answers. But absolutely. And I want to take an opportunity to thank you and Safe Harbor.
Well, it's our pleasure, and I just appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you guys. Anytime that Chris is retired, well, he thinks he's retired, but even then, I know that if I call either one of you gentlemen, that you will show up in a flash if there's a need. And so I appreciate you both. Thank you so much for tuning in. And so check out the 211 with United Way. You can also access some resources at safeharbor.nc.org. Tap into some gratitude, look for opportunities to serve, and acknowledge Mental Health Awareness Month throughout the month of May.